Well, now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to tell you a story about this woman. Her name is Mary Ann Cord. I met Mary Ann Cord in Elmira, New York, where my wife, and she was really known to us as Auntie Cord. She was a servant. She was our cook. And I met her at Elmira, where my wife, 3 daughters, and I spent 7 summers, beginning in 1874. I first wrote about Mrs. Cord, Mary Ann Cord, in an article that I published in the Atlantic magazine. It was called A True Story, repeated word for word as I heard it. In that story, I changed Auntie Cord's name to Aunt Rachel. This is her story. Aunt Rachel was our servant, and she was a black woman. It was no more trouble for her to laugh than it is for a bird to sing. One night when she was in such a humor out on the porch there, I asked her, "Aunt Rachel, how is it that you have lived for over 60 years and never had any trouble?" "Has I had any trouble, Mr. C?" "Well, I know all about slavery, 'cause I've been one of them. My husband and I had 7 children, and we wouldn't have given them up, not for anything in this world. My mother was born in Maryland, and she was mighty proud of that. Oh, but she could make the fur fly. One day my little Henry tore his wrist awful, and he busted up the top of his forehead too. And when none of the people in her big kitchen would tend to him, she said, 'Looky here, I want you people to understand that I weren't born in the mash to be fooled by trash. I's one of the old blue hens chickens, I is.' And she cleared that kitchen with a wave of her hand, and she bandaged up my little Henry herself. So I says that too when I was riled. Well, by and by, our old mistress, my mistress, said that she had to sell all of us at auction in Richmond. And I know what that means. They put us in chains, and they made us stand on these big platforms in the front of the crowd, and the people in the back would come, and they would grab us by the arm or the leg, and they'd say, "Oh, this one's too old. This one's too lame. This one don't amount to much." And they sold my husband first, and then they began to sell my children too, and I started to cry. And the man said, "Hush up, woman!" And he hit me on the mouth with the back of his hand. My little Henry was the first and last one to be sold. I put my arms around him and I says, "You can't take him away. I'll kill the man that touches him." And then Henry looks at me and he says, "Mama, I am going to run away up north and work to buy your freedom." And then that man tore Henry away from me, and I took my chain and I beat that man with the chain. And he beat me too. Well, the man that bought me took me to New Bern to be a cook for a Confederate officer and his family who lived in a big house that had a big kitchen. Well, when the war come along, the Yankees took that town, and the Yankee officers moved into that big house, and they asked me, would I be their cook? And I says, "Why, that's what I's for." One day I asked those officers if they had seen a boy up north with a scar on his left wrist and another one on his forehead. But none of those officers had seen my little Henry. Still, though I didn't know it at the time, Henry had run away up north and become a barber. And when the war come along, he says, "I'm tired of barbering. I'm going to find my mama." And he hired on with the Yankee officers, and he traveled all through the battles in the South looking for his mama. Well, one Friday night, we had a fancy soldier ball for a black regiment that was stationed in our town, and all those soldiers were dancing around through my kitchen and sashaying this way and that, and all of a sudden a young soldier with a gal around his waist comes a sashaying again through my kitchen and making fun of me. And I says, "Rummage, stop that." And I looked at him and I could see that his face changed. Well, pretty soon that black orchestra, the band, whatever they were, they started playing the songs and they started making fun of me too. And I says, "Look at here. I want you soldiers to understand that I weren't born in the mash to be fooled by trash. I's one of the old blue hands chickens, I is." And then I looked at that young man, and his face looked like he had forgot something. And as he was leaving, I heard him say to another soldier, "Jim, you tell the captain that I won't be around until about 8 o'clock in the morning." Well, the next morning, I went down to the kitchen, you see, to cook breakfast. And I was bending over the stove like this. And I had a pan of biscuits in my left hand, and I was holding on to the stove door with my right hand. And all of a sudden, I looked up, and I see these big brown eyes looking back into mine. And then I just stopped right there, and I just knowed. I dropped that pan of biscuits on the floor, and I pushed back his sleeve, and I took my hand to his forehead and pushed back his hair, and I says, "Boy, if you ain't my Henry, what is you doing with that welt on your wrist and that scar on your forehead? The Lord God of heaven be praised! I've got my own again." No, Mrs. C. I ain't had no trouble. And I ain't seen my husband and 6 of my 7 children to this day. And that is 20 years ago, last Easter. I ain't had no trouble and no joy.